Ken Follett is a master storyteller. His novels have been translated into over 30 languages. Now he's embarking on his most ambitious project yet, a trilogy of historical novels which require extensive research. Follett is funding this himself, and he's not worried about the business risk. So what's the secret to his success? The ride on the London Eye continues.
How do you write successful books? Do you listen to people and say, well, actually, maybe we need a bit more of that? How have you progressed as an author through the years?
Well, I listen to people all the time, and I show, at certain stages in the process, I show what I've written to various people, to editors, to my New York agent, who is a very good critic, to my wife Barbara, and to members of my family. I have a couple of friends who are very perceptive critics. So I show stuff to people all the time. I don't necessarily take their advice, but I'm always interested. If they say this chapter was a bit boring, then that's a very serious criticism. I've got to look again at that chapter and think, oh, why was he bored? What have I failed to do in this chapter? So I do that all the time. Listen to people. I show my drafts to people, and I listen very carefully to what they say, and I take action on it.
Do you fear failure? We speak to CEOs who say, instead of wanting to get it right, I don't want to get it wrong.
I'm not anxious, no. I don't lie awake at night thinking, oh my goodness, is this really any good? No, I don't have that kind of fear of failure. I have that desire to please an audience that runs very deep in me. But I'm not anxious, and I figure if I write the first draft of a book and it's not very good, well, I'll fix it. And if the second draft isn't good enough, then I'll go over it again. And I'll keep at it until it's right. It usually only takes me 2 drafts, but some books I've written more than that. Some books, the second draft hasn't been good enough. And I've thought, and my agent has said to me, the phrase used to be, it goes through the typewriter. He would say, it needs to go through the typewriter again. And I'd think, oh, no. But I would always do it.
But how do you do your research? Does something catch your eye and you say, actually, I'm interested in this, so the rest of the world will be interested in it as well?
Yeah, and what I think is I could write a story about that. I read something in the newspapers or in a history book, or somebody tells me a story, or I see something on TV, and I think I could tell a story about that. And I think about, how I would dramatize it and what the people would be like. And that's, people say, where do you get your ideas? But most authors have antennae, and they're constantly searching for ideas. And then something like that happens, and you think, yeah, I wonder if I could do that.
So how long does it actually take you to think of a plot, and then you work on this with researchers for sometimes a couple of years?
It's at least 2 years. Yeah, 2 years is really the fastest for me. Sometimes more. Pillars of the Earth took me 3 years and 3 months. And the process is, first of all, a long planning period, which is 6 months or a year, and then the first draft, and then the rewrite.
Research is crucial to your books. Are you helped by historians or philosopher? What kind of support do you have around you?
Yes, I certainly have professional help, mainly, though, to look for mistakes. Most of the research I do myself. I have a researcher who finds stuff for me. Finds out-of-print books and old maps and that kind of thing. But I read the books myself, or if I quite often interview people, police officers, for example. Quite often interview police officers for research for a story. But I do that myself. I don't have somebody do it for me. But what I have other people do is read the first draft and look for mistakes. And in fact, for Fall of Giants, my latest book, I actually ended up employing 8 historians to read the first draft, because I needed a specialist on the Russian Revolution, a specialist on the suffragette movement, a specialist on Germany, a specialist on America, and I ended up with 8 of them. But it's worth it, because people, I think readers like the feeling that the historical background is authentic.
Of substance?
Yes. They're not reading it for the historical background, that's a sort of extra. But nevertheless, they like to think, if I say that such and such a person was foreign secretary in 1914, then that's correct. That is what the guy's name was, and it's spelt right too.
Do you have any, when you talk about all the substance and the research, is it something that you ever want to compromise on?
If I have an idea for a way to do a scene and then it turns out the research tells me that it couldn't have happened that way, well, I'll think of another way to do it. Because I wouldn't take the, I wouldn't want to give people a story that had a sort of a woeful inaccuracy in the middle of it. Even if I thought nobody would find out, I still wouldn't feel comfortable about it.
Up next, the fight is on.
We have to accept that there are terrifically attractive rival forms of entertainment, and we've got to do better.
Ken Follett is the literary phenomenon who conquered the publishing industry. He started as a journalist and only later in his career gave writing novels a try. 130 million books later, how did he make it? He's telling all to Francine Lacroix on the London Eye.
When did you first realize that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I guess it was in my middle 20s. I was working as a journalist and on a newspaper, and I was having quite a good time, but my heart wasn't really in it. And I was writing fiction in my spare time and in holidays, in the evenings and at weekends. And I gradually realized that was what I really liked, was imaginative fiction.
And that was your passion, and if you don't have the drive, it's very difficult to become a bestseller.
Well, I've always loved stories. It's always been a huge pleasure for me. I learned to read when I was 4, and ever since then, it's been one of my greatest pleasures. And then when I began to write stories myself, I would read something and I would think I could do that.
But do you have a favorite book, the one that maybe made you want to become an author yourself?
Well, certainly the first James Bond story that I read, which was Live and Let Die by Ian Fleming, that blew me away. I was 12 when I read that story, and it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me. And I just thought James Bond was absolutely the picture of what a man should be. That's what I thought when I was 12. But also, the story was written in that wonderful, racy style that Ian Fleming developed for the James Bond character. It was so right. And when I started writing later on, what I wanted to do was give readers the kind of excitement that I'd felt reading James Bond stories.
And you can be an author for all cultures, and that's a key, is that you have to write, I guess, something which appeals to the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the South Americans.
Yes, and I am a bit unusual in that. There aren't many authors who appeal equally to Spanish readers and German readers and Brazilian readers and Japanese readers. It's something to do with the fact that I'm not English, I think. English writers tend to have a very English focus. They're much too interested, for example, in social class, question of social class. Most people around the world are bored by the question of social class. And I think I'm Welsh, and so coming from a culture that is slightly off-centre in Britain, I think has helped me appeal to an international audience. Meeting readers in different countries is an enriching experience. In Germany, for example, they like me to read. And when they first asked me to do that, I said, well, I'll read for 5 or 10 minutes and then answer questions from the audience. And I got a very Teutonic message back from my German publicist saying the German readers will be very disappointed if you do not read to them for an hour. That's what they like, and people people buy tickets to come and hear authors read from their book for an hour. So yes, it's in for example Italy, I can't imagine Italians sitting down for an hour listening to some guy reading.
We have a short attention span in Italy, unfortunately. There's a lot of talk about our kids nowadays dumbing down or just thinking about popular culture, just thinking about celebrities. Do you see that in the way that society is moving, and what impact does that have on an author?
I don't see it. I have 6 grandchildren between the ages of 1 and 17, and they all love either to read or to be read to. And there are such wonderful books for 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds now. Mine all love a book called The Gruffalo. In fact, I took all 6 of them to see a stage show in London at Christmas with the Gruffalo in it. And so they're already terrifically into literature. They watch TV as well. But you know what? If we want to entertain people, if we want to compete with television and video games and all that sort of thing, we've got to write better books. You know, think of all the kids who queued up outside bookshops at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning for the latest Harry Potter. You know, they're the television generation. They could have stayed at home and played a computer game, but because J.K. Rowling wrote such a good book, they left their computers behind and went to the bookshop. That's the answer. That's what we've got to do. We have to accept that there are terrifically attractive rival forms of entertainment, and we've got to do better.
But so there's no... Are we not missing our imagination sometimes?
I always say we've got to give them something they can't get on television. Television is very easy to watch. I want them to turn the TV off and pick up a printed book or an e-reader, and instead of looking at glamorous pictures, I want them to look at some print. And if I'm going to get them to do that, I've got to give them something that they really like and that they really want.
You're very passionate about your writing. What are your other passions or hobbies? I know you have a rock band.
Yeah, I'm in a blues band. It's called Damn Right I've Got the Blues, and we rehearse every Monday night in a soundproof studio, and then 5 or 6 times a year we play in public. I play bass guitar, and I like it so much, partly because it's so different from what I do all day. Writing is very cerebral, and my books are very heavily plotted, so I'm always figuring out all the kinks and the loops in the story, figuring ahead. And playing in a band is very sensory. It's about the ears and the fingertips. And it's so completely different. And anyway, it's so loud. The guitarists turn up so loud you can't think anyway.
Ken, what do you hope the next 20 years will bring you?
Well, I'd really like to stay healthy and alive long enough to see my grandchildren married and having children of their own.
And more bestsellers?
I certainly hope so.
Ken, thank you so much for joining us on London Eye. I hope you enjoyed it.
Certainly did.